Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Israel's parliamentary election is just around the corner, and the parties are stepping up their campaigns in an attempt to steer popularity in their favor, as less than a month remains until the March 17 elections. Polls predict a close race to the finish line between two major parties, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing Likud and Yitzhak Herzog's center-left Zionist Union. With us today in the studio are the foreign media advisor to the Labour Party, Gabriel Sassoon, welcome, and Likud member, Dr. Emmanuel Navon.
Hi.
It's good having you here. Our TV7 analyst for the day is Paula Sleer. Paula, I'd like to start with trying to understand what's going on. We had already a program not a long time ago about the election, and we're nearing just less than a month away. What can you tell us that is going on right now?
Well, I think what we notice on the political front is the two big parties really rising up for a challenge. You have on the one hand the Likud party, the party of the incumbent Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and then you have the Zionist Union, which is made up of the Labour Party and the Hatnua Party. The latest polls say that Likud stands at 24 seats and the Zionist Union with some 25, and those seats keep changing every few days, so it really is a challenge between those two parties. Having said that, though, the majority of Israelis do believe that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is slated to be the next Prime Minister. The latest polls are 67% believe that whether or not his party comes in with the most number of seats, as it is in Israeli politics, he will be tasked by the president to actually form a coalition government. So that's where we stand at the moment.
This is actually a very interesting point, Paula. Mr. Sassoon, with regarding to this statistic about Netanyahu being the one, no matter what happens, to be the next Prime Minister of Israel, according to Israelis, is quite contradictory to two polls, which means that in one point it says that 51% Benjamin Netanyahu is viewed as Israel's legitimate Prime Minister, and 28% Yitzhak Herzog, which is slated to be the Prime Minister if the Labour Party or the Zionist Union wins. But at the same time, when the same poll, which was published by Mina Tzemach, is asked whether the next Prime Minister will be Yitzhak Herzog, only 17% say he will be the next Prime Minister, meaning that there are even people in your camp of the Zionist Union and your supporters who say that even if we win, he still is not going to be Prime Minister. What does that mean?
Well, these are the benefits of incumbency, aren't they? I mean, you see that playing out. People may see Netanyahu as being the most likely candidate to be tapped by the president for the prime ministership. But I mean, it's one of the benefits of incumbency. I think that the more voters get to know Yitzhak Herzog, the more voters get in touch with him. And when people meet him in person, as a matter of fact, and it's very common in Israel for people to meet in salons and big events, the more people meet him, the more they see him as prime ministerial material. But again, I think these are perceptions. It's not a question of you're quoting statistics, Paula, of what people expect to happen after the election. But I mean, there's a number of. I mean, we can go through the numbers. I don't think it'll interest the viewers, but you can easily see scenarios in which Yitzhak Herzog will be tapped to form government.
Dr. Navon, your comment?
Well, you spoke before about feelings and beliefs of people. You spoke about how people perceive Yitzhak Herzog. The matter of fact that it has nothing to do with feelings, about how people are perceived. It has to do with math. At the end of the day, you have to form a coalition. And as you mentioned, according to the polls, Likud and Labour are neck to neck around 25 seats. But at the end of the day, the leader of the largest party, or the second largest party, has to form a coalition. And if you look at the figures today, Yitzhak Herzog does not have a coalition. Netanyahu does, because for Herzog to form a coalition, he would have to put together the ultra-Orthodox parties and the anti-clerical Yesh Atid party. And even then, he would barely have 60 or 61 seats. It would not be a functional coalition. It would be unlikely. Even in the 2009 elections, At the time, the Kadima party, which was headed at the time by Tzipi Livni, got one seat more than Likud. They had 28 as opposed to 27 for Likud. And yet, Livni did not have a coalition. So Netanyahu was asked to form a coalition, because in Israel's coalition politics, in order to form a government, you need coalition partners. And as of today, the Labour Party does not really have a potential coalition.
Even with the 12 blocking union of the air parties?
Well, you know, this union is composed, it's a very awkward union of communists and Islamists and Arab nationalists. Basically, they got together for the sake of the election in order to pass the new electoral threshold. My estimation is that right after the election they'll fall apart, because it's really not a natural union. And I do not see them recommending any party. As a matter of fact, their leaders have said already that they would not recommend any candidate, any party for the prime ministership. So as it is of today, I do not see them being part of a coalition led by Labour.
Mr. Sassoon?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that. You know, the last election was a completely different story. I think everybody kind of knew throughout the election. Labour was polling something like, Labour was running by itself last time. It wasn't running with Tzipi. Obviously, Tzipi Livni ended up in Netanyahu's coalition at the time. But you know, it was very clear to everybody that Netanyahu was going to be prime minister. This time around, I don't think that that's at all clear. I think you can easily see you know, I don't want to discuss the potential coalitions. I think it's important to note that, you know, Shas says certain things before the election, the ultra-Orthodox parties say certain things before the election. But you know, it's been clearly stated by a number of parties that they would be prepared to sit with each other. You know, Yesh Atid, what the professor says is an anti-clerical party, has said it's prepared to sit with the ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox have said that they were prepared to sit with they're not ruling anybody out. So I think you certainly can see a path, and it's certainly possible. And given the fact that they just need to be tapped, you know, Herzog needs to be tapped by the president. You know, you need about 61 members of Knesset to recommend Herzog as prime minister. After that, he can form his coalition. He has you know, several weeks to form the coalition. That's a completely different story. And once you're tapped as prime minister, I mean, you're the PhD professor, but you know, correct me if I'm wrong. But I mean, after you're tapped to form the government, then you form the government. It's completely separate.
If you manage to do so.
Right.
It doesn't always work, but again, the president also said, he mentioned those last days, that he would really demand from all the parties to recommend a candidate, and he will not let them get away from the president's house after the election and say, we don't really know, we don't really care. He will demand from them a recommendation. So at the end of the day, you know, if enough parties recommend one or candidate or the other, that more or less will determine who will be the prime minister.
But I think it's telling, just to jump in really quickly, I think it's very important, very telling that we're hearing from, you know, Likud people that, oh, well, there's no other alternative, you know, this is the incumbent, there's no other alternative than Netanyahu.
I didn't say that, by the way.
But, okay. But
I said that Herzog doesn't have a coalition.
Okay, but I mean, I think that, you know, we hear that people expect Netanyahu, many people expect Netanyahu to form government. I don't think it's at all clear from the polls. I don't have the polls in front of me now, but when you've been reading the polls of the last few weeks, it's not at all clear that that's what people want. I mean, you've only got a Likud of about 20-something odd seats. You know, Netanyahu's approval figures are in record lows. People are very upset with the economy. They're extremely upset with how Israel's being isolated internationally. This congressional speech that I'm sure we'll discuss has been a complete disaster.
We'll touch all this, we'll touch base in a few minutes about these points. Paula, how do you see this?
Well, there are some rumors circulating that you might even see some kind of coalition being formed between the Zionist Union and Likud, and then you could bring in a party like Naftali Bennett's, and that might ultimately give you your 60-plus majority in your new government. You mentioned the Arab parties. I think one of the challenges facing the Arab parties is that in the last election there was something like 50% who voted. So we do have the problem in this country of Arab voters not actually coming forward and wanting to cast their ballot. You also made the point about polls and how they change, but certainly the perception out there in terms of what I'm assessing is that we are going to have a right-wing coalition. You have right-wing parties that are losing support, but they're losing support to Likud. And the latest polls, again, you know, one has really only polls to go on, say that 51% of Israelis see Netanyahu as the most experienced leader to come forward. He's very strong on security credentials. Although security isn't necessarily the main issue that people will be going to the polls to, of course, that's always his commanding strength.
Dr. Navon, regarding Netanyahu's popularity, even though in the past few years he's been seen as the ultimate leader, no replacement whatsoever, slowly there is some kind of change in the perception of the Israeli public, where they're starting to consider other people who, for instance, Bougie Herzog of the Labour Party, he wasn't even an option for 4 years ago or 2 years ago. In this case, how does Netanyahu cope with this?
Well, it's not a secret that he's not the most popular politician in Israel, to say the least. It's just that a lot of people, even though they don't really like him, don't really see an alternative. Also, it's true that he's been in power for a long time, because if you add the first stint as prime minister between 96 and 99, so altogether he's been in power for 9 years almost. So that's a long period of time. Now, within his party also, there are potential incumbents, people who are starting to challenge him. There's also one of the senior members of his party, Moshe Kachron, who formed his own party based on an economic platform. Yes, there are people starting to challenge him within the right, but for the present election, he's the candidate of Likud. So that's people who want a conservative government don't have any other options. So that's basically the only game in town. It doesn't mean that he's popular, that people love him and want him to stay as a prime minister. Some people do, some people don't. But the options are limited. If you don't want a left-wing government, that's the only game in town at this point.
You were talking about him being 9 years in power altogether, including his first term. Does this play for him or against him?
Well, by Western standards, I would say, you've had leaders being in power for more than 10 years sometimes. I mean, Tony Blair, resigned after 10 years. Margaret Thatcher was in power also for about 10 or 11 years. I think the record so far has been François Mitterrand in France for 14 years. Generally speaking, 10, 12 years is top in the Western world. So I think he himself does not expect, assuming that he gets re-elected in a month, I don't think that he expects, or anybody expects him to stay after that more than 4 years. So I think that this would be his last stint as prime minister. Even if he would consider running again in 2019, I would say, he would definitely be challenged within his own party, that's for sure.
I think it's clear.
Mr. Sassoon?
I think Netanyahu wants to be. I think he can't see Israel as being led by anyone other than him.
Well, that's he might think that, but a lot of other people think otherwise, including his own party.
Well,
so.
yeah.
How do you see the situation, though, for Netanyahu, especially in the situation where, as Dr. Navon said, he's not considered to be the most popular person in the country, but at the same time, nobody really sees an alternative to him?
No, I mean this is said frequently of incumbents. I mean particularly so of Netanyahu. It must be said, but no, I don't agree. First of all, we've got 4 weeks from today until the election. A few weeks is a long time in politics. So a lot can happen in that period of time. People are talking about the chemistry between Tzipi Livni and Yitzhak Herzog. People were excited many weeks ago when the parties came together. Again, 4 weeks is a very long time in politics. People don't want to see Netanyahu as prime minister. They really don't. I mean, they may think that he's inevitable, but I don't think they want to. The polls are showing they do not want to see him as prime minister, and we'll have to see. I mean, look, one more thing is that last election, Yair Lapid, this centrist party, he was polling at 10, 11, 12. Then the polls, you can't show polls on the media for several days or a week before a week before the campaign. I mean, the next week he got 19 seats. He's now sitting on 20 in the current Knesset. 20 seats. He's the largest party in the current Knesset. So there's always an election surprise as well. So one would hope that that's going to be Zionist Union and Herzog.
Well, you were saying that most of Israelis don't see Netanyahu as the next prime minister, but as we heard Paul at the beginning of the show, 51% of Israelis actually see Netanyahu as the most suitable prime minister. So where's the contradiction?
Well, again, it's incumbency. I mean, I'm from Australia. I mean, before the 2007 election, for the most part, John Howard was seen as, there's no other alternative in the country. You can't possibly elect anybody else. All of a sudden, you have this team of Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, and they stormed the 2007 election in a landslide. So, I mean, these things, it's politics. These things can certainly change. And by the way, just from Australia, there was a state election just now. There was a one-term Conservative government swept out of office in a massive turnabout for the Labour Party. So, I mean, we know in history there's been massive turnabouts. And I don't think a massive turnabout is needed. It's a few seats here and there, and you can see a stable coalition for...
Australia has a two-party system, and Israel has a coalition system.
Right.
And that makes a big difference.
It makes a big difference, but I think you can see a scenario where the centre parties grow by a few seats, where the Zionist Union grows by a few seats, and you can certainly see a coalition in there. I mean, the electoral system is another thing. I'd love to see a change in the electoral system here. I'm sure you would too. Yeah.
All right. Paula, your comment?
Well, following on from what you said, I mean, 4 weeks is a long time in politics, and even more so here in Israel.
Right.
And one of Netanyahu's strongest points has always been his security credentials. There were questions that were raised in Israel over hesitancy that people perceived in terms of how he dealt with the Gaza war last year. But the flip side of that is it's not as if the perception out there is that the Zionist Union leaders have the kind of experience that he has. There are questions that are being asked about the roadmap that they present. It's one thing to criticize the incumbent prime minister. It's another thing to have a viable alternative roadmap that you're putting forward. There's also criticism that some of the promises they're making are unrealistic. I make reference here to a promise that within 1 year the poverty amongst Israel's elderly will be eliminated. So I do agree with you, though, on the one hand, that there certainly is a sense of Bibi fatigue. That's the term that people use here, and that is a campaign that is working against him. But again, it's not so clear that there is anybody, whether from within his own party or outside, that can stand up and have the same kind of credentials that he has.
Well, I'd like to move to Bougie Herzog, the Labour Party chairman. 4 years ago, he wasn't even in the picture. Of course, he has a rich history of family ties to legendary Israeli diplomat Abba Evan and son of Israel's president Chaim Herzog. But other than, you know, being an officer in the Israeli intelligence and being a quite mediocre politician in certain aspects, where does he stand suddenly to come out and say, okay, I'm here to replace the incompetent Netanyahu?
Where was Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996? Who was he to challenge Shimon Peres, the storied Shimon Peres? I mean, he won the 1996 election. I mean, you can always say this against incumbents, you know. Benjamin Netanyahu has been in power for 9 years in total. The country's had enough. No one questions Yitzhak Herzog's credentials. He's been served, as a storied minister for many years, with great success, and I don't think anyone questions his credentials. I haven't even really heard it from the Netanyahu camp. On the other hand, you see a scare campaign from the Netanyahu camp. I mean, just the other day, I think it was yesterday or the day before, a TV ad came out, or an internet ad came out, which showed ISIS coming and asking the way to Jerusalem, and someone said turn left. So it's, the implication from Netanyahu's party is, they're interested in scare tactics and equating the left with, support for ISIS or something. I'm not really quite sure. But he's obviously scared of something, but he's certainly not questioning Herzog's credentials.
All right, Dr. Navon?
Well, I think in terms of the credentials, as you said, Herzog comes from a blue-blooded family. But the question is, he lacks charisma, and Israelis don't really know him. I think he's had a hard time also to impose himself as a reliable candidate, not because he's new. I mean, as you said, when you challenge the incumbent, of course you don't have the same experience. That's true in every democracy. It was true of Netanyahu himself when he challenged the incumbent prime minister. But the problem with Herzog that he really lacks charisma. Israelis don't really know him. I mean, he served as a social welfare minister a few years ago. And also there are problems with the campaign of the Labour Party. I mean, there are many disagreements between him and Tzipi Livni. It is hard for Tzipi Livni always to criticize the record of the present government because he was part of it. So that's also one of the problems Labour. Like he brought Tzipi Livni in, and now they're criticizing the record, including the security record of the common government, but she was part of it. She was part of the security cabinet. So it's also creating, it's hard for people to buy it when they say, well, the government did a terrible job in the war in Gaza when Tzipi Livni was part of it. And I think also people realize that those kind of wars are asymmetric war, and it's really hard to actually completely win, because we are in an international system where The whole media is on Israel's case. These wars are asymmetric, and I think that most Israelis don't really buy it when people come and say, well, if I had been in charge, whether it's the left or the right, by the way, even when Avigdor Lieberman said if I had been a foreign defense minister, it would have been different. I think most Israelis don't buy it and realize that it's much more complex than that.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Navon, I'd like to ask you the next question with regarding to, as you said, Netanyahu was already 9 years in power, and the last few years in his 2 last terms, one of the main topics was the economy. And it seems like he's diverting the entire focus of his campaign on the defense aspect of his term, and also the dangers in the Middle East, which obviously are threatening to many countries in the region. How does the Israeli public respond to such a campaign when he pretty much excludes economy altogether?
Well, to be frank with you, I think the economy should be part of the campaign. It's a very important topic. And to be frank with you also, I do believe that Netanyahu did much more when he was finance minister for the economy between 2003 and 2005. And also
finance minister.
As finance minister, than during his 6 terms in office as prime minister, I admit it. I mean, the major reform that took place under his prime ministership was under his previous government in the communication market, which were liberalized by his Minister of Communication, Telecommunication, Moshe Kahlon. Yes, I think that the Likud has not done enough for the economy. But I say this as somebody who is a free marketer. I'm not a socialist. I think that Likud should pride itself of being a free market party. And the best way, in my opinion, to lower the cost of living and to improve people's living standards is by having a free market economy. Unfortunately, Likud has not done enough to fight the cartels and monopolies that are the opposite of the free market. I do not believe in the socialist or neo-socialist solutions or so-called solution of the Labour Party, but I admit that Likud in the past 4 years or 3 years has not done enough to implement its free market platform.
Mr. Sassoon?
Yeah, they certainly haven't done enough, but it's quite the opposite. Now, I hope we'll get to talk about some foreign policy issues which probably interest your viewers, maybe more than economic issues in domestically. But I mean, this government has taken a wrecking ball to the economy. Ask anybody out there. It's very difficult to rent out there. It's difficult to find well-paid, dignified work. I mean, these are the problems that real Israelis are concerned about. I mean, it's the biggest issue in this election is going to be the economy, unquestionably. To give you one statistic that sort of merges the sort of diplomatic issue with the economic issue, 35% of the money for subsidized housing under Netanyahu's government has gone to the settlements outside the Green Line, which houses less than 5% of the Israeli population. 35% has gone to the settlements. And people are sick of this. People are sick of this free market, trickle down sort of settlement economics, and they're interesed in a change, a real change.
Market, by the way, subsidizing is the opposite of free markets.
Right, but I mean, there's going to be subsidized housing under any government. I mean, we're not the United States. This is a country that believes in protecting the poor, but 35% of the money is going to the settlements, and then and the rest of the economy.
Where's the statistics from, by the way?
Where's the statistic from? This was from the government. This was from the government itself. Put the statistic out. Uri Ariel, the housing minister, will gladly tell you that this is the statistic. He's proud of it.
All right. Last sentence on the topic.
I'm saying trying to present the settlements as the cause of the economic troubles.
I'm not doing
in
that.
Israel.
I just think it's unfair. It's just a matter of fairness.
But I'm saying the people who live beyond the Green Line are people who work and pay taxes. It's not a black hole, sipping government money. So
so are people in the south and the north of the country.
So all these people work and pay the taxes, and it's for the government to decide whether or not they want to keep those communities. But trying to present it as some government transfer taking away from the rest of the country, the people who live on both sides of the Green Line work and pay the taxes.
Oh, but
we don't have much time left, so
it's lipstick on a pig. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, it's an awful policy.
We'll have to continue to the next topic, the foreign policy. Paula, what can you tell us about that?
Well, it's noticeable that the Israeli-Palestinian issue isn't at the moment a big issue in the election. At the same time, Netanyahu certainly is making the issue of Iran a centerpiece of his foreign policy, and in the coming weeks he'll be going to address the Congress in the United States, not at the invitation of the American President Barack Obama. Critics say that this is an election, part of his election campaigning that ultimately many feel will actually fire back at him. But you know, that's open for discussion and that's open for different perceptions. Just to go back to what the discussion was here, certainly the research at the moment indicates that for most Israelis, they will be voting on economic issues, as you said. Something like 40 to 50% of Israelis indicated that was an issue, rather than foreign policy.
Okay. So foreign policy is less interesting to Israelis than...
In terms of how they will vote,
right.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Sassoon, what's your opinion on the foreign policy situation currently?
Well, Netanyahu is taking a wrecking ball to the bipartisan U.S. support for the state of Israel. Undoubtedly, I mean, there's bipartisan support in this country. There's multi-partisan support for treating Iran as the most serious strategic threat Israel had. There cannot be a nuclear Iran. There's no question. But I mean, for Ron Dermer, you know, the U.S. ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., and Netanyahu and Boehner to pretend that this is anything other than Likud electioneering is laughable. I mean, he could have scheduled this speech in the Congress for a day after the election, 2 weeks after he's currently scheduled it. He's doing it for domestic consumption, and at the same time, he's destroying the strategic relationship between Israel's most important ally and this country.
All right, Dr. Navon?
Well, I'm sure that when you say destroying, you're not overstating anything. Destroying the relationship with the United States. I mean, look, all the polls indicate in Israel that most Israelis actually oppose this speech and say that it will not convince them more to vote for Netanyahu if he speaks at Congress. So I do not understand why Netanyahu would use this to gather more votes when the Israelis themselves are saying that they really, it will not convince them more to vote for him if he talks at Congress. So I do not see how you can say that, you know, he's doing it for electoral reasons when the electorate itself said they don't care about it and even oppose his speech.
Well, the fact that it's not working doesn't prove that that wasn't the reason he did it.
Well, first of all, I'm saying it's obviously not the reason today because polls show that it's not going to work. Now, Ron Dermer was also accused of, you know, being unprofessional by not notifying John Kerry about this speech, but then Brunner himself said that he's the one who asked Dermer not to say anything to John Kerry. So we first of all had to set the record straight about what happened exactly and see things in the right proportion. At the end of the day, we're talking about a speech at Congress. He was invited by the Congress, and saying that this is going to destroy the relationship with the United States is really completely overstated and exaggerated.
Well, sadly, we're out of time. In general, we'll have more programs in the near future about this topic when we're nearing the election, and we'll be happy to have you both here again. Dr. Navon, thank you so much for coming here. Mr. Sassoon, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Paula, a pleasure as usual, and I'd like to thank our viewers, and we will see you next time.